Imagine a universe where cats and dogs are built from like the exact same underlying architecture.
Right, like no biological differences at the core at all.
Exactly. No genetic divergence over millions of years, none of that. According to the text we're looking at today, the only thing separating a bark from a purr, the only thing that divides these two totally different entities is just a fraction of a millisecond.
It is a genuinely wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm sitting down with our resident expert to decode something pretty unusual today. Normally, we are synthesizing massive volumes of research for you, cross-referencing hundreds of pages of case studies.
Yeah, usually we have a ton of material to get through.
Right. But today, our source material is, well, microscopically small. We are analyzing a single, highly enigmatic fragment of text.
It's literally just one run-on sentence.
Yeah, one sentence. Yet somehow, it contains this staggering, sprawling philosophical puzzle about creation, sequence, and, the fundamental nature of reality itself.
It's the ultimate exercise in high-density synthesis. When you only have a handful of words to work with, every single syllable, every structural choice, and especially the metadata surrounding the text, carries just immense weight.
Oh, totally.
So our mission today is to essentially map the internal logic of this universe based on this tiny keyhole glimpse into its mechanics.
And, okay, that metadata you just mentioned is genuinely fascinating because of the sheer contrast it creates.
Yeah.
Visually, at the very top of this document, we have this grand, imposing, almost academic title. It reads, "On the Designation of Number and Purpose."
Yeah, it sounds like some esoteric 19th century philosophical treatise, right?
Exactly. It sounds so heavy. And then beneath that title, we have 4 very rigid structural hashtags. It's hashtag fragment, hashtag sequence, hashtag timing, and hashtag construction.
And those tags, they immediately prime you to think about, like, industrial mechanics. They suggest we're looking at a schematic or maybe a diagnostic readout from some kind of ontological assembly line. It sets a very cold, deliberate, structural tone.
Which is exactly what makes the actual body of the text so incredibly jarring. You have this massive, heavy framing device, but the text underneath is talking about something just incredibly mundane.
Household pets.
Household pets. The entire fragment is using cats and dogs to explain the fundamental mechanics of existence.
So, okay, let's unpack this. The text begins with a core paradox. It literally just says, cats are designed one way while dogs are designed the same way.
Which obviously completely defies our basic everyday observation of the world.
Right, it does. And my initial instinct when reading that is to push back on the literal phrasing. I mean, if I use the same blueprint to build a house, I get the exact same house. How can cats and dogs possibly share the exact same design?
This is a fair question.
If I'm looking at this through the lens of, say, object-oriented programming, I might assume we're talking about a base class. You have a foundational, let's call it a domesticated quadruped.
I like that. Right. And both the cat and the dog inherit that base code. They have 4 legs, a tail, an instinct for territory. But in software, once you instantiate that class, you assign different properties to the subclasses. The cat gets retractable claws. The dog gets a different vocal cord structure.
Right, they diverge.
Exactly. But this text doesn't say they share a base class. It says they're designed the same way. It implies the final architecture is identical.
Yeah, and you're touching on the right abstract framework there with the programming idea, but we really need to lean into that hashtag construction tag to understand what design actually means in this specific universe.
Okay, lay it on me.
So in our physical world, design usually dictates the biological phenotype, right? The fur, the claws, the vocalizations. But the logic of this fragment forces us to strip away all physical rendering. In this document, design isn't a biological blueprint. It is a pure, abstract concept.
So we aren't talking about the physical mechanics of building an animal.
No, not at all.
We're talking about the mechanics of building a concept.
Precisely. Think of it less like a schematic for a specific machine and more like the foundational concept of, say, shelter.
Right.
A canvas tent and a reinforced concrete bunker share the identical conceptual design of shelter. They both create a boundary between an interior space and external weather.
Right. The core function is the same.
Exactly. So according to the internal logic of this fragment, the cat and the dog share an identical conceptual design. They are identical vessels for companionship or domesticity or terrestrial observation. The core structural parameter is a perfect mirror.
Okay. But if the underlying conceptual architecture is a perfect mirror, what acts as the wedge that splits them into two distinct realities?
That is the big question.
Because if the code is identical, why does the compiler output a creature that sleeps on your laptop in one instance and a creature that chases cars in the next?
Right.
The text suggests the only variable left isn't biological and it isn't environmental, it's purely chronological. Which brings us to the next 5 words of the fragment, but either before or after.
And here is where the real philosophical heavy lifting happens. We have to view this through the lens of the sequence and timing tags.
Okay.
The fragment is making this radical claim about identity. It argues that the only distinguishing factor between these two entirely distinct life forms is their temporal placement relative to one another.
Just when they happen.
Exactly. Their location on a timeline is the actual crucible of their identity.
Man, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because it forces us to rethink time as an active physical ingredient. Let's look at this through the mechanics of human expression, like think about music.
Okay, I'm with you.
The notes themselves are the raw design. You can take an identical set of notes, a C, an E, and a G. If you compress the timing and play them all simultaneously, you generate a bright, cohesive major chord.
Right. The emotional output is joyful.
But if you stretch that temporal placement,
It changes everything.
yes, if you take that exact same design, those exact same 3 notes, but you arpeggiate them slowly, maybe leave a long, dissonant pause before that final G, the entire emotional reality shifts. It becomes suspenseful, or maybe melancholic.
And the ingredients haven't changed at all.
Not one bit. The design is identical. The timing is what fundamentally alters the nature of the phenomenon.
That aligns perfectly with the timing tag. Or, consider the architecture of comedy.
Oh, that's a good one.
A joke is a highly specific structural design. You have a setup and a punchline. 2 different comedians can memorize the exact same joke word for word. The design is identical.
Right?
But the comedian who understands timing will pause for just a fraction of a second right before the punchline, creating tension, and the room will erupt.
And the comedian who rushes it, who alters the temporal placement, watches the joke completely disintegrate.
Exactly. It fails as comedy and just becomes a confusing sentence. The timing determines whether the joke manifests into its intended reality.
Wow.
And the fragment is applying that exact same logic to ontology, to the existence of these animals. A cat and a dog are just different punchlines to the same cosmic setup, manifesting entirely based on when the delivery occurs.
That is, wow. And that brings the grand title of the document into sharp focus, right? On the designation of number and purpose. We actually haven't talked about numbers yet, and the text itself never explicitly uses the word purpose in the body.
Right.
But before and after inherently create a mathematical framework, don't they?
They do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the title is really the map for the fragment. You cannot have the concepts of before or after in a void.
Right.
They require a sequence, and the moment you establish a sequence, you are actively assigning a number.
Because something has to be in the first position and something has to be in the second position.
Exactly.
The very act of placing them in time is the act of numbering them.
It is a chronological indexing system. The sequence is the designation of number. And once an entity is placed in that sequence, once it is locked into slot number 1 or slot number 2, that numerical placement dictates its ultimate purpose.
So its purpose is basically determined by its slot.
Right. Its purpose is to fulfill the role of the entity that came first, which this text implies manifests into reality as a cat, or its purpose is to fulfill the role of the entity that comes second, which manifests as a dog.
That is just a staggering paradigm shift for the listener to consider. It takes this completely mundane observation of like 2 pets sitting on a rug and turns it into a fundamental law of physics for whatever universe this fragment comes from.
It really does.
It asserts that time isn't just a passive dimension that objects move through. Time is the sculptor. Time is the active force that takes an identical conceptual blueprint and bends it into 2 completely different species, purely based on sequential ordering.
It's a completely algorithmic philosophy. The design is the input, the timing is the function, and the cat and the dog are the outputs. But an algorithm implies execution. A blueprint implies an actual act of building, which leads us to the moment of creation described in the text.
And this is arguably the most heavily debated and honestly visually strangest part of the entire document. Because having established that sequence and timing are the tools of creation, the fragment attempts to describe the actual event. But the sentence doesn't conclude cleanly. The syntax fundamentally breaks down.
It creates a severe textual anomaly.
Yeah, let me read this final phrase for you, exactly as it is typed on the page. We have the setup. Cats are designed one way, while dogs are designed the same way, but either before or after. And then it concludes, and this is what makes the difference between when making a cat and a dog a dog.
When making.
Yeah. My immediate analytical reaction to seeing that on the page is to assume data corruption. Like, is this a glitch in the optical character recognition? Did the author's hand just stutter on the keyboard? We are so conditioned to consume clean, polished, edited text that when we see a double repetition, like when making, we just automatically write it off as an uncorrected error.
And that is a completely natural assumption, but discarding it as a typo ignores the very first piece of context we were given.
The hashtag.
Right. The very first hashtag at the top of the document is fragment.
So you think the tag is actually a warning about the integrity of the text?
I propose the repetition is a highly deliberate textual representation of mechanical friction.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This isn't a polished essay, right? It's raw output. Remember, this entire text is an exploration of construction. When we think of divine or cosmic creation, we usually imagine this smooth, frictionless, magical event.
Right. Like, let there be light. And instantly, perfectly, there is light.
A seamless transition from nothing to something. But this fragment completely rejects that idea. This fragment describes an assembly line. It describes a heavy industrial stamping process that takes an identical design and relentlessly hammers it into different temporal slots.
Oh, man.
So the double when isn't a typo. It is zooming in on the absolute critical nature of the temporal coordinate. It highlights the exact indivisible microsecond of the sequence.
And what about the making?
Making. That emphasizes the physical labor, the mechanical looping required to stamp out reality. If you have an impossibly massive machine churning out identical designs and sorting them into before and after to create the universe, that machine is going to have a rhythm.
Yeah.
It's going to have a chug, a physical stutter, making.
That is so cool. It's forcing a visceral experience onto the reader. When my eyes hit that double repetition, my internal monologue literally trips. My brain stalls for a fraction of a second trying to process when making.
And in that fraction of a second, you are personally experiencing the delay. You are actually experiencing the timing.
The text is performing its own philosophy. That's incredible. It actually reminds me of the mechanics of a film projector.
Oh, how so?
Well, when a movie is running perfectly at 24 frames per second, you don't see the individual photographs. You just see smooth, continuous motion. You are immersed in the illusion of a seamless reality.
Right. You don't perceive the machinery at all.
Exactly. But if the film catches in the gate for even a millisecond, the illusion breaks. The projection stutters. Suddenly, you become violently aware of the discrete frames. You become aware of the mechanical gear pulling the celluloid, the intense heat of the bulb, the friction of the system.
That's a great analogy.
By stuttering the syntax, the author is intentionally catching the film in the gate. They are refusing to let us read past the mechanics of creation.
Exactly. If the author had written, and this is what makes the difference between making a cat and a dog, it would be a clean, easily digestible thought.
Yeah, we just skim right past it.
We would consume it and move on. By inserting the stutter, the text demonstrates that the construction of reality, the assignment of number and purpose, is difficult, laborious work.
It really makes you wonder how much of our own perceived reality is just the byproduct of a mechanical stutter. I mean, we navigate our lives categorizing the world around us. We look at a forest and we see oak trees, pine trees, birch trees. We look at a city and see buses, bicycles, pedestrians.
We constantly sort things.
We do. And we inherently assume that the differences between all these things are intrinsic. We assume they are built differently from the atomic level up.
Right, we prioritize material differences over temporal ones.
Exactly. But this fragment forces a complete reevaluation of that assumption. What if the underlying fabric of everything we see is entirely uniform? What if there is only one true design in the universe, and the staggering variety of life, of objects, of experiences is solely because this cosmic machine is stuttering through time, making things in a relentless sequential loop?
It raises profound questions about taxonomy. If a cat and a dog are the exact same entity, merely separated by chronological indexing, then our entire system of classifying the natural world is flawed.
Yeah.
We are categorizing things by their temporal output rather than their foundational truth.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's take a step back and synthesize this journey, because we have extrapolated a massive metaphysical framework from just a single sentence about domestic pets.
We began with a seemingly nonsensical premise, the idea that cats and dogs share an identical design.
A premise that required us to abandon our reliance on physical traits and fully embrace abstract conceptual architecture. We had to understand that design can be a foundational blueprint of purpose rather than biology.
Right. And then we explored the mechanism of divergence. If the design is perfect and identical, the only tool left to create variety is time. The sequence, the simple act of being placed before or after, acts as a chronological index, which assigns a number, and that number dictates the final physical manifestation. Time is the active ingredient that forces an identical concept to branch into two realities.
And finally, we analyzed the phenomenology of the text itself. We recognized that the glitchy, stuttering syntax of when making wasn't an error to be corrected, but a feature to be experienced.
Yeah, a textual simulation of the mechanical friction inherent in building a universe. The text made us feel the delay that it was theorizing about.
It is genuinely a masterpiece of conceptual efficiency. I mean, to pack an entire, cohesive cosmological theory into a handful of words using the most recognizable animals on Earth to do it, it forces you to look at your own surroundings differently. You might walk into your living room later today and see your dog sleeping on the rug, but through the lens of this document, you aren't just looking at an animal anymore.
No, you're looking at a temporal marker.
Exactly. You are looking at an entity whose entire existence is defined simply by the fact that it was stamped out on the assembly line after the alternative.
It strips away the illusion of inherent complexity and replaces it with the profound weight of timing. It suggests that when we are is fundamentally more important than what we are.
And that leaves me with one final lingering thought. This is something for you to mull over as you close out your day and step back into a world full of seemingly distinct, unique objects. We've thoroughly mapped the logic of this source. Text, a cat and a dog are the exact same foundational design, their entire identity split and formed solely by one being instantiated before or after the other.
Right, the temporal gap is the engine of variety.
But if that logic holds true, what entirely new, completely unseen entity would manifest if that exact same design were executed simultaneously? If the mechanical chug of the machine stopped, if the stutter vanished, and there was no sequence, no before, no after, no number to designate purpose, what unfathomable thing would be created in that exact singular moment?